In this lecture, I'll discuss a bit of just repeating some of the issues which you might have discussed, because we have noticed among you we have got some students who are not who are not medical. We have people from the biostatistics class, and and maybe from health promotion, who might not really understand some of the concepts of communicable diseases. So I will have a very general session and very basic session where I'll also touch a bit of communicable diseases so that you understand. So in terms of communicable disease, if you say a disease is communicable, what do you mean? By saying a disease is communicable, it means a disease that is spread from one living organism to another living organism through the environment. So yeah, that's the simpler meaning of the word communicable disease. Where we say by communicable disease, we are saying a disease is spread from one living organism to another living organism through the environment. It might also be necessary for us to define what is a pathogen. Some of you might not understand what is a pathogen. A pathogen is an organism that causes diseases. So yeah, so there are several pathogens. For people to develop diseases, some diseases they can develop, yes, without pathogen, but most of the infectious diseases which we have, they develop, they are caused by the pathogens. Then what is an infection now? An infection is a condition that occurs when a pathogen now enters the body. It then multiplies, damages the cell, and causes the infection. So I think it is from this light, what is important for you to understand is to understand that a communicable disease is a disease that is spread from one living organism to another living organism through various mechanisms. But the most way is through through the environment. Then in terms of pathogens, as I defined in the first slide, pathogens are disease-causing organisms. There are different, types of classes of pathogens, but these are like the main four classes. But you can add, other more high-level classes. But in terms of an easy classification of pathogens, we have got these four main classes. We have got our viruses, our bacteria, our fungi, and our parasites. So the first one, which are viruses, I hope now we are, the COVID-19, the COVID-19 virus, which is currently causing havoc. It is a virus. So in terms of definition, just a similar definition, what is a virus? A virus is a piece of genetic material which is surrounded by a protein coat. In other ways, you can say a virus is not a living organism. You can say a virus is acellular. And for the virus to survive, usually it needs another organism for it to multiply. That's why you see viruses like HIV, it's difficult to cure them. Why? Because they become part of the human genome for them to multiply. Then what is a bacteria? Bacteria are single-celled microorganisms that can live almost everywhere on the earth. So bacteria, they can live independently as opposed to to viruses. Then for fungi, these are plant-like organisms that cause diseases of in various parts of the body, which include the lungs, the mucous membranes, and the skin. Then for parasites, these are living organisms. Usually, they cause disease within the human being, as the human being will act as the host. They host this organism, and in that process, they will be causing they will be causing disease. So generally, in terms of infectious disease, these are the typical four classes of pathogens. But we can have other higher classes like the rickettsia, whatever. But I think at this level, it's not necessary for you to really go that much. Then these are just examples of common communicable diseases. For the viral infections, we have your SARS-CoV-2, your influenza, your polio, your measles, your chicken pox, your smallpox, your HIV, your herpes, your hepatitis B virus. All these are examples of viral diseases. Then for bacterial infections, we have got anthrax, we have got streptococcal, which can cause a throat infection. We have got TB, yes, is classified as a bacteria, but yeah, it's a bacteria. But I think there's, as I said, I'm mainly discussing the simpler classification. Actually, it's a mycobacteria, whatever, but it's not necessary for you, but just understand it really follows under bacterial infection. We have got other things like diphtheria, tetanus, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. All these are bacterial infections. Then for fungal infection, you put your athlete's foot, your ringworm, your candida, your vaginal candida. That's an example of a fungal infection. Then for parasitic infections, we have got, I hope you know, most of you, I think you're working within the ministry. You have seen these programs where we know the deworming programs, where we'll be giving children of the school going age some of the deworming tablets to try to deworm the worms. So those worms, the helminth, schistomiasis, they are examples of parasites. So in general, these are examples of parasitic communicable diseases, which are caused by various infections, which falls in those classes. Then the next thing which I want to discuss is the transmission. How really are these communicable diseases transmitted? We have got two ways in which these communicable diseases are transmitted. We have got direct contact, where you pick the pathogens by direct contact with an infected person or an animal. And what are these examples of direct contact? We have got kissing, we have got biting, we have got sexual contact, we have got sneezing, we have got coughing. And also we can have transmission of this virus from mother to child, which is in utero. So these are examples of direct transmission. Then you can also acquire these communicable diseases indirectly, actually without really being close to someone who is infected. For example, you can really touch contaminated objects, mostly surfaces. For example, I hope you know the issue of corona. That's why we talk of hand hygiene, sanitization, and all those issues, because you can actually get it from a surface. Then some of these can be transmitted by vectors or parasites. For malaria, with mosquitoes, and for some tick-borne diseases, which are transmitted by ticks. And some of them are transmitted by food or water contamination. I think this is very common with some of those infectious diseases, which causes gastroenteritis, which causes, some GI symptoms and diarrheal diseases. Then we have got airborne transmission. This is also very common, where pathogens, they float in air. Then you can actually get infection by inhaling some of those pathogens. So generally, in summary, these are the ways in which communicable diseases are transmitted. Then the next section, I didn't put anything on this section. Maybe we might need to discuss a bit in terms of what is the general principle in terms of preventing communicable diseases. What is the general principles? You can raise your hand. Then I unmute yourself and give a response. What is the general principle when you want to prevent communicable diseases? Anyone to You can raise your hand, then I can unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself and speak. Who wants to try? You guys, I thought you've done basics of epidemiology and prevention of diseases. And how really do the basic principles in terms of managing communicable disease. Standards, Dr. Standards, tell us, how do you do this? How do you manage communicable disease? You can unmute yourself. Yes.
So in terms of preventing uncommunicable diseases, we would need to have preventive and curative services.
Yeah, sure. Anyone, who knows the epidemiological triad? Yes, there's Constance. Unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to say we can break the route of transmission.
Hello, yes, go ahead.
I was saying we can break the route of transmission. Say from the environment to the host, we can break by implementing prevention measures.
Yes,
for example, washing hands.
No, that's fine.
For others.
No, that's good. Anyone else? So I like your approach. Remember, in terms of you can mute yourself. In terms of the approach for managing communicable diseases, we talk mainly of the epidemiological triads, where we talk of the host, the agent, and the environment. So I'm not going to go in detail really in terms of how, but it's more of really either you are targeting the agent, you are targeting the agent, you are targeting the host, you are targeting the agent, you are targeting the host, or you are targeting the environment. So if you go to your early lectures, actually, where we were discussing, where you guys did your epidemiology, I think these issues were discussed. So can you make sure you guys, after speaking, you mute your mic. Make sure your mic is always muted. So yeah, so that's the general principle. I'm not going to go in detail in terms of really how do you manage communicable diseases. As I said, the main principle, yes, you can use other principles. Yes, yeah, I heard Terence, you talked about curative services. Curative services, yeah, usually we don't really, in terms of public health is more about prevention. Yes, we can talk of curative, but let's just understand when you're preventing communicable diseases, the main really target is to use your epidemiologic triads, where you have strategies targeting the host, strategies targeting the agent, and strategies targeting the environment. So I think the simpler disease, maybe you can do this alone as part of your homework, where you can actually take, for example, malaria as a communicable disease. I hope you know now, in terms of strategies which are used to prevent malaria, targeting those various things, if you're targeting the host, there are issues to do with giving the host prophylaxis, and these days there's been talk of, I think, for a malaria vaccine, you give the host a vaccine. If you talk of the environment, there's issues of cutting grass, issues of filling the pots, and all those other issues. If you talk of the agents, I think there are issues to do, spraying spraying, issues to do with spraying. There are other methods which are used to actually kill the mosquito, all those other issues there. So that's the whole concept. That concept might not apply to all communicable diseases, but generally, if you are preventing your communicable diseases, that is the approach. That's the approach which we use. Then I think that should be enough in terms of a brief introduction of communicable disease. I'll then move on to the next, which is non-communicable diseases. So what are non-communicable diseases? Non-communicable diseases, these are diseases which are not transmitted by another person or a vector or from the environment. So that's the difference. With communicable disease, they are transmitted from one person to another. But non-communicable diseases, they are not transmitted by another person or a vector or from the environment. Usually, these diseases, they develop mainly due to certain habits or behaviors. And these behaviors can increase the risk of these diseases. So for communicable disease, usually, we talk of risk factors now. We talk of things which actually predisposes people in developing these diseases. Generally, we have two types of risk factors. We have got risk factors which we can control in terms of their effects. This includes, for most of these communicable diseases, things like tobacco use, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, physical inactivity, excess weight, stress, drug and alcohol use. These things actually predisposes to various communicable diseases. For example, tobacco use, it can lead to lung cancer. It can lead to chronic, it can lead to, the pulmonary COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Things like high blood pressure can lead to stroke, can lead to heart failure. Things like cholesterol can also lead to strokes, just behaving sedentary life, and excess weight. They also cause various diseases. So, but these things actually, they can be controlled, or advice can be given actually on how to minimize some of these things, which means they are controllable. However, we have also what we call uncontrollable now. There are things which predisposes non-communicable disease. Some of them we cannot control them, and the things like gender. Some of them they are. So it can be like a family history. If there's a family history of some certain disease, because of that, you can also be at risk of getting that disease, which is hereditary now. Then there are diseases which affect females more than males. Then there are diseases which comes with, with age. Some of those things you cannot really control them. So generally, in terms of prevention of communicable disease, maybe we can hear from you also, what is the general principle? What is the general principle in preventing communicable diseases? You can raise your hand, then speak. Or I can just speak anyone. What is the general principle in preventing communicable diseases? What programs are you implementing? I know some of you are I've seen some of you in districts, some of you as DMOs, which means you have been implementing some of these things in your district. What were you doing in this district? Dr. Choga, I will ask you, who was a DMO? I know Dr. Dandas was a DMO. Who else was a DMO, Dr. Choga? I don't know you yet. Hello?
Yes, I was a DMO.
Yes. What were the activities which you were implementing to prevent communicable disease?
Communicable
So
diseases.
non-communicable. Sorry.
Okay. Non-communicable diseases. The principle is to address the risk factors
Yeah.
for the diseases.
Exactly. So yeah, right. For communicable diseases. So yeah, we are right. In terms of communicable diseases, it's really all about promoting health lifestyles, in all those issues, and try as much as possible and address those risk factors, which we have which we have discussed. If it's about tobacco use, you have programs to address tobacco use. You have got programs, to manage the blood pressure, issues to do with diet so that you control some of those things. So mainly, when you're talking of non-communicable disease, the general principle in terms of managing these diseases, it has to do with really managing those risk factors. Then I hope you also remember, on top of what I discussed for communicable disease, where we talk of the agent, the host, and the environment, I hope you have learned also, the levels of prevention, where we talk of primary prevention, primordial prevention, primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary, prevention. I think that one, yes, it can apply to both non-communicable and communicable diseases. But I think it really applies well to non-communicable disease as a principle on top of really controlling the risk factors. Because most of these non-communicable diseases now, you already have the disease, they have complications. So because of those complications and whatever happens, it means those people now might end up needing, secondary prevention. They end up needing tertiary, prevention, where now we are talking of palliative care and occupational therapy because of the complication which might be caused by this disease. So for non-communicable disease, the prevention really, you can actually then go where you can use, where you can really follow those levels of prevention, which I have mentioned. I'm not going to go in detail with those levels of prevention, but please make sure you read your notes to try and really understand, to try and really master, those principles. So I think this is the end for the brief lecture on just introducing communicable and non-communicable disease, so that really some of you who don't have a medical background understand this. But the basic distinction, just to recap, between communicable and non-communicable disease. Communicable disease, it means they are passed from, you get them from someone. But non-communicable diseases, usually they don't, they are not spread, you don't get them from another person. And for the communicable disease, in terms of the transmission, it can be direct or indirect. Then for non-communicable disease is about really exposing yourselves, exposing yourself to risk to risk factor. In terms of control, for communicable disease, the main, way to control is the issue of you want to address the epidemiological triad, the triangle. And that's where, I think we discussed this when we started the epidemiology. You need to address the host, you need to address the environment, and also address the agents. Then for non-communicable diseases, it's all about really working on the risk factors. Usually we say, we want to modify the lifestyle. It's lifestyle modification, which we really need to focus on. But the issue of levels of prevention, where we talk of pre-modal, modal, secondary, whatever, and tertiary, those levels, they still really apply because non-communicable disease, they end up, you end up having, developing complications. So because of that, you might need to then implement some of these control measures to all those actually who will have developed the disease.